We are back, and we have added kind of a base shape to our terrain that we can kind of build up from. But there's something I did not do at the end of the last video. Technically, okay, I'll admit it, I just forgot. But I want to be able to forget. I want to get to a point where even when I don't do this, you remember and you take care of it on your end because it's just a good idea. And of course what I'm referring to is saving your work. The other thing, though, is that because we saved this and then we moved it into this scenes folder. Remember, we saved our scene, and then we named it Level 1 Snow World, and then we created our nice little folder here, and everything was nice and structured. Watch what happens when I go to File, Save Scene. Now, I'm not doing Save As, just regular Save Scene. You can also hit Control-S or Command-S if you're on a Mac. We get our level, once again, but now it's outside the Scenes folder again. And so you're thinking, oh, well, no big deal. I'll just expand the Scenes folder, and wait a minute, it's here too. So you might be thinking, well, all right, well, let's just see if I can overwrite the one that's there. And you can't. You get your little cross circle again saying you're not allowed to do that. The problem is that we saved the scene and then we moved it to a new location. And Unity hasn't made the association yet to that new location. Here's how we're going to fix it and then keep it from happening in the future. We're going to click on Level 1 Snow World and delete it. You cannot undo this action, which is very ominous and scary, and it should be. Every time you delete something out of your project folder, you need to take a moment and pause and look up toward your ceiling and think, do I really want to delete this forever and ever and ever? And if you don't, make sure you've backed it up, because again, this is just a folder in your OS. And then we'll click delete, and there we go. Now, we're going to drag this into our scenes folder just like we did the very first time. And it pops right in. Now, the last thing we're going to do, and we really should have done this before, but I'm kind of glad we didn't because it points this out if you ever happen to see it on your end. Just double-click it. And what that just did, we didn't see anything happen, but it has reopened our scene while making the association to the new scenes folder. So that now, if I go to File and Save Again, we don't see another version of it pop up outside the folder. So it's just made an association to that location, which was really great because Lee pointed it out because I kind of froze when I saw it happen. My brain kind of went blank, and I forgot where I was, and I started to panic and sweat, and it was kind of scary. And Lee's like, it's just, remember.
It's relax, just do this. It's like, I've done it.
And I was like, oh, yeah. So one of those things. So Lee's always got my back. Okay, so now what we're going to do in this video is sculpt out some customized shape for our terrain. Now, again, back into some viewport navigation, because it's important. Hold down my Alt key and my left mouse button, and we'll rotate around. I'll use middle mouse to kind of frame up a little bit, and then right mouse to kind of zoom away. Just kind of centering us up a little bit. Now, if I select my terrain, we have a lot more here than just the terrain toolkit. As a matter of fact, I'm going to collapse the terrain toolkit here in the inspector by clicking on the little tiny gray triangle directly to the left of it. So now that's not even on our plate. We don't even see it. All of those tools are hidden away. What we're going to be using are these tools that are already a part of the terrain by default. The very first one of these is raise and lower. So if we click on that, take just a moment. I know it's easy to overlook this, and I think it's really, I don't know, it has to do with user interfaces and because we're all from the internet generation. I don't really know, but whenever I see something that is generally horizontal, my brain immediately clicks over into banner mode, and I filter it out. And I don't always read it, but take a moment and read this.
I thought it was just a guy thing, instructions.
It could be. It could, I don't know. It could be written into our genetic code that we don't look at this kind of thing. But click to raise, hold down Shift to lower. There's not much else I can teach you, but I will show you what these other switches do. But take a look. As soon as we come back over here to the terrain, we get this little blue dot that follows our cursor around. And if you're curious, go ahead and click and drag. And you'll see that you are indeed raising up an area of the terrain.
And this actually brings up a good point. The reason the response that you see right there is almost real time is due to those settings that you dialed in for the size of the terrain.
Oh, yeah.
If you were using the default settings of the 4 square kilometer terrain with uber high resolution on all the settings, you're going to see a lot of lag.
Yeah, expect this to slug quite a bit. I mean, unless you're running this on, the Starship Enterprise or something.
That's true. So if, for you decided that, you were going to start with that 2K by 2K texture, and you're not seeing the response that you would hope, dial those settings back down until you get something that works on your machine.
Absolutely. Now, I'll be the first to admit, We are getting some chunkiness, in here, just some areas that don't really look so perfectly rounded and things like that. I'm not worried about that for the purposes of a demonstration level. If it really does bother you, honestly, I would just advise you for now to put it out of your head and not worry about it until later on. Later on, when you create your own terrains, you can start tweaking those values and get something a little bit higher. And the setting that you would be looking to change, just to kind of throw this out there, if we go back under the terrain menu, come back under set resolution, you would want to increase your height map resolution. And you start getting a much more detailed setting. We're using a very, very low one right now because that's really all we need. Now, I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that really weird stroke that I just made. And I just want to point out a few more things with painting on the terrain like what we're doing. So notice as I click and drag, we get these elevations that just kind of keep rising up. Because I am a lot closer to the terrain at that point, you'll notice the feature looks a lot different. Distance of your camera does actually affect the behavior of this brush. If you're really far out, the result is that you're covering more distance more quickly with the stroke of your mouse than if you're up close. If I zoom in really close, we're not moving as far, and so we're going to pull up a lot higher. Right. So I recommend that you zoom out until you can see a pretty good percentage of what it is you want to paint, and then start from there. Now, the first thing we're going to do is create a perimeter wall around the outside of our level. Now, before I do any of this, I want to throw out this disclaimer. I am not even going to get involved in the discussion of proper level design, of good level design, of what makes a good playable game, what you should and shouldn't do. All I'm going to do is keep the player from ever easily getting to a point where they could walk off the edge of the world. That's the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing. And we could just start by creating a little perimeter wall like this. And you notice I'm just dragging the mouse around the outermost edge of my terrain. Very, very simple. And again, I want to reiterate that the way I'm building this terrain, there is no right, there is no wrong. Feel free to follow along in whatever manner you choose. I want to have a perimeter wall, so that's kind of where I'm starting. If you want to make a level that looks slightly different than mine, I encourage that, actually. I love it when people don't exactly follow along with the tutorials. However, if you're going to be all brave like that, please don't email me saying, hey, this stuff that I tried to do that had nothing to do with your tutorial isn't working, so why didn't you mention that in the tutorial? Because I've actually received those emails. And it's not a way to get added to my Christmas list. That's all I'm saying. All right, so now I'm going to push up the wall here where we've got some low spots. We can add some irregularity to it so it's not doesn't look exactly like a wall. As a matter of fact, we could pull it out in a couple of places. And I'll show you how we could kind of expand it, thicken it, and flatten it out if we want to put like some trees and whatnot at the top of it a little bit later. For now, we just want to make sure it's nice and steep and nice and big because we want the player to get to it and we want it to be an impassable wall so that they can't get over the edge of it. Notice the hard edge of the terrain sits outside of it, away from anywhere the player would be able to see. Now this one spike that I created is a little bit high. We can push that down by holding down the Shift key when we drag. And you notice that does kind of the inverse of the tool, where just regular dragging pulls up, this pushes down. Now, if your brush is too big or too small, you have some sliders here that control how that works. You have an overall brush size slider. And this is over in the inspector on the right-hand side, about midway down your screen, give or take, depending on your resolution. If we drag this all the way to the top, I get this massive brush, which we could use to make a great big hill in the middle of our terrain. And something interesting just started to happen, but I'll do it again and point it out. So if I hit Control-Z and then paint this again, watch this. We eventually get to a point where the terrain automatically plateaus out. And while I don't want to get into explaining every single setting just this moment, I'm going to go back under the terrain menu, come back down to set resolution, and point out the terrain height, which is capped at 200. That is the highest altitude in meters that our terrain can get to. So as we paint this height and go higher and higher and higher, things will eventually plateau when they hit 200 meters. So keep that in mind. That is what that behavior corresponds to. It's this number. All right, so this is all looking pretty good for starters. Now, when you are making your levels, I highly recommend you do this with a plan. Creating a random terrain and just saying, oh, well, I want to build a level, so I need some terrain, and then you just kind of start playing from there. That can lead you around in circles where you spend all day kind of going back and forth with what you want to do. Your terrain might take forever to get done, and it will probably end up not being very good in the first place. So I strongly recommend, from a design perspective, to have a plan when you go in. That said, I actually do have a plan for what we're going to be building here. There are going to be 3 primary areas. We're going to have a little tiny camp area where the level, the game, if you will more or less start. We're going to have a little pathway that is going to fork to the left and to the right. In one of those directions, and it doesn't really matter which one, we're going to go to a little, kind of a hot spring out in the middle of our snowy area, the kind of place where you're like, oh, snowy mountains, hot water. It'd be like perfect place for, a hot tub and bring your friends and some drinks. And then in the other direction, we're going to have kind of an abandoned facility, scary mine-looking thing that I've created in Maya, and we'll talk more about bringing that in a little bit later. That's my plan. Now, I don't have sketches of it. I recommend you make sketches when you're doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, pencil and paper, always a trusty fallback.
Oh yeah. Easy way to do that. But let's go ahead and just kind of create some really generic parts that we can start from. So I'm going to take my brush size. Now, I'm still using the soft brush. You notice there was a little palette here of different brushes you can click on. I mean, we could click on the star brush and make a little raised star in the middle of our level, which is useless, but it looks cool. Let's grab our soft brush once again. I'm going to pull this down to about 50, and I'm going to bring my opacity down. The opacity, you might be thinking, why are we painting with opacity? Isn't that my favorite description for opacity is see-throughness. Isn't opacity like the see-throughness? And it is, technically. What we are painting underneath the hood is what is called a height map. And a height map is a graphical representation of elevation such that black is the lowest elevation you're ever going to get to, and white is the highest elevation you're ever going to get to, and all of the differing shades of gray between black and white are your various other altitudes. So what we're doing, as far as Unity is concerned, is just painting on this black and white map, and it is interpolating those results into a 3-dimensional model. That's why you see opacity. If you don't want to think about that, if that's way too technical, and you're like, really, dude, just chill and show me how this works, then relax and think of opacity as how high or how much emphasis your brush is going to have, how much change is going to take place. So if we pull this way down to, say, around 10%, we can start bringing up a kind of a raised area over here in the corner of our map. Now, this is just going to be a hill. Right now it's kind of a high hill. I'll push some of it back down by holding down the shift key. And I want to make kind of a little cove-like area. There's like a little hollowed out section where it'd be like the perfect place to set up your tent, and it would be sort of sheltered from the wind, and you could cook your s'mores and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is get out a brand new tool that we haven't even looked at yet, and that is the Set Height tool. It's right next to the Raise and Lower tool, so it's just one over. Now, all of these tools that I'm clicking on here have hotkeys, and while I don't want to inundate you with every hotkey that exists out there, if you're the hotkey type and you like taking notes over this kind of thing, if we hold down Shift and hit W, we go over, and I'll get my mouse completely away from it, so just keep your eye over here on the inspector. So Shift W grabs us the Set Height tool, Shift Q, which is actually to the left, grabs us the next tool to the left. And as you march down the keyboard, Q gets us the Raise and Lower one, W gets us the Set Height, E gives us the Smooth tool, which is the next one over, and you'll see how they all correspond directly to those keys up until you get to the last one, and this is Settings. It doesn't necessarily need its own hotkey. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out. All of these tools that I'm going to show you have hotkeys. If you hold down Shift and just march down Q, W, E, R, T, and Y. Okay, so now that I've pointed that out, let's come over here to the Set Height tool. And what this does is this allows you to define a specific height for your terrain, and it will just pull the terrain up or push it down, whichever is required at the time, to get it to that altitude. So as a demonstration, let me take my brush size and pull it way down, because the brush we have right now is just ridiculously oversized. And by default, my height, which is a slider that just popped up over here in the inspector, it wasn't there when we were just using the Raise and Lower, is currently set to 40. Well, let's leave it at 40, and if we paint, it pulls everything up until it gets to 40, and then it stops. And as I hit the spacebar again just to scare you, let me keep my brain separating the Alt and the spacebar key. Let's rotate around here. And there we go.
You're going to have to click inside.
Well, I did already. It's like my Alt key suddenly decided to quit working. That's okay. There we go. It came back. I'm not sure why it decided to suddenly quit working, but now it's back and everybody's happy. So I created a little bit of a raised plateau here by setting my height to 40 and dragging with a mouse. Now, just to demonstrate what's really going on, if I take my height here inside the inspector, notice we're at the height slider, come over here and set this numerically down to 20, which is half that altitude, and then paint right next to this, you'll see that we have another plateau at half that altitude. Now that's how it works. Now I'm going to hit Control-Z a couple of times and make those go away. And I'll move us over here. Again, I'm using the Alt key, and I use a lot of Alt left to tumble, and a lot of Alt middle, and a lot of Alt right to zoom in and out. So at some point, as we progress through these videos, I will probably start kind of slacking off mentioning what keys I'm hitting to navigate the viewport. If you need to, take a little bit of time and practice that navigation method. Now, there are other ways to navigate the viewport if you don't like using this Maya style of navigation. And what I mean when I say that is the navigation we're using here, where we hold down Alt and use these buttons on the mouse, is exactly like the navigation found in Maya. If you don't like using that, then there are some other methods that you can check out in the reference section that goes along with these videos. That said, with our set height tool, let's take our height, and I'm going to pull it down. This is just a test value. I'm not sure if it's going to do what I want. We're going to set it down to 10, and then paint right in here. And I think that's just about exactly what I wanted. And we're just going to carve out a little opening section right about here. So, like I said, we're just making kind of a little cove. Now, at the same time, I don't want this area we're creating to suddenly make it very easy for the player to get over here to the edge and fall off. So to really kind of drive that whole thing home, we have a couple of different options. And you're welcome to take either one you like. Chances are the player couldn't climb these walls. They're going to be way too steep. What we can do is either bring all this area back here behind this little cove, we can bring this up so that it all just kind of becomes a sheer wall up to here. Or another thing we could try, alternatively, is we could push down kind of a little trough back behind everything. So if I hold down Shift and come back here, we can make sure we push all of this down so that there's no way the player could get from this raised area up to the top of this wall. At least not without a really serious jump, which we're not going to be supporting anyway. We will have jumping, but nothing that severe. I'm going to pull some of this up a little higher just to be on the safe side. Change the shape a little. In fact, I mean, if I really wanted to be picky, I would probably do that in a couple of other areas too. Really for no other reason than it looks cool. It's like I did it on that one spot and was like, hey, that looks kind of nice. Let's do that in other places too. How's it going, Lee?
Not bad. Just watching you play around with the terrain.
I know.
You can get lost doing this for hours.
You really can, and I got to be careful because I don't want the whole video to just be me, and you watching me sculpt. But so we got a little bit of variation here. Now I'm going to jump over to the smooth tool, which is the next one over. This is analogous to Shift E if you want to click on a hotkey instead of a button. And if we use this, you'll notice this does exactly what the name suggests. It just kind of smooths out the transition of the surface so things don't look quite as rough. And the amount of smoothing is going to be controlled by opacity. So if we were to lift that up, we're getting some really heavy smoothing, a lot more than we really need. So be very gentle with it. Now, I am of the school where I suggest that you take all of your terrain strokes and build them up gradually. So everything should be set to a generally very low opacity, and you start layering your strokes on top of each other, and you'll get a much more natural look. And usually, I go for much lower opacities than what I'm using in this video. So let's smooth out in here, so this isn't quite so severe. And something like that looks pretty good. Now, we have two other areas that I want to get to, being the little abandoned mine area that I mentioned, and the hot spring. Now, let's put the hot spring over here. So I've got the raise lower tool. I'm going to select that again, which we can click on again, or just as a reminder to drive them into your brain, we can hit Shift Q to activate that. And let's make the brush a little bit bigger. And really low opacity. I'm going to be really careful as I push this down. I'm going to hold down Shift and just push down an area here. And you'll notice we eventually hit a plateau. And that's because we are now at the bottom of our terrain. We are at an altitude of 0, and there is no going any lower than 0.
Right. If you were to see the height map, that would be a perfectly black spot.
That's right. Now, that said, if you are going into your terrain knowing that you need a lot of ups and a lot of downs as well, then something you can do is as soon as you've created your terrain, you can grab your set height tool and set everything to like 100 or so. And then you've got a lot of room to go up and down if you wanted to do that. Me, I'm not worried about it. And I actually want the water to be somewhere right around 0, so that makes things a lot easier. So let's say that will be about the area. Oh, maybe push this over a little bit more. I don't know. I don't want to take up too much room because, I mean, it's a spring. It's not a lake or a pond or something. But that'll work. Now, for our mine area, which we're going to use this area kind of over here to the left of our campground, let's grab our set height tool once again, which, as a reminder, is Shift W. Now, a height of 10 is pretty good, but let's say we want to go up a little higher. We actually want there to be kind of an incline to get up to this. So we'll set this to, let's just try 25, and if that ends up being too high, then we'll just kind of go from there. Excuse me. So now we'll paint, and we'll get our little plateau. We'll build that right into the side of the hill, like so. We'll get that nice and sharp. Now, as soon as I get that in, and that's probably about all the room I'm really going to need, I'm going to build up around that. So let's grab the raise and lower tool again. I'm going to raise up this back wall a little bit higher so that we don't have to worry about anything nasty going on. And I'll push that back down to our proper altitude here in just a few moments. Let me take my brush size, and we'll increase it a little bit. Now, opacity is really low, which I want. I want kind of a gradual build-up. Now, notice this is changing, kind of breaking this up here. Don't worry about that. We can set all that back here in just a moment. All I'm doing is kind of building the gentle incline that'll get us where we want to go. I think over here I'd like to build kind of a hill to sort of enclose this. So we'll just kind of puff this up a little bit. And again, we've destroyed our little area, but all we have to do is come back to paint height, bring my brush size down a little bit, and we can set this all right back. I like working this way using paint height first because it kind of allows me to prototype that elevation and see if that's going to work well for me, and then kind of go from there. And we could probably extend this out to right about there. Now, let's switch over to smooth. Once again, that's going to be Shift E, and we can smooth this out. We can smooth out this transition. Kind of smooth out what's going on through here. And we'll have a little dip down right there, but that's okay too. So now we've got our 3 areas. It'd be nice if the terrain itself kind of suggested a path, sort of a trail to lead to all of these. So I'm going to grab my raise lower tool again. This time I'll just click on it, but the hotkey is Shift Q. And let's see, an opacity of 6 will probably do us pretty well, but let's pull the brush size down. Let's say to about 10 for now. And I'm just going to push this in all the way up to here. And then we'll branch out here, so it'll be kind of a fork, and this will lead over to our spring. And we'll kind of widen it out once it gets out to here. And if that made it all the way to ground level, and it did, we may need to raise that back up. So let's just real carefully pull that back up. Now that does look a little bit sloppy, so I'm going to end up just smoothing that out and getting that back to kind of where I want it. In fact, let's go ahead and do that now. Let's grab the smooth tool and do some general smoothing right in here. Irregularities are fine though. I mean, it's terrain after all. Now some other things, and this is all just vanity at this point, so we've got the basic idea down that I was looking for. So we can add a little bit more elevation here to like some hills, kind of box in where the character is traveling. So I mean, so if your more enterprising player may try to strike out and go where the path doesn't lead, and that's fine. That's not going to mess with me too much. But I do want to make it look like that would be a harder trek, a more difficult journey. And this is a pretty good place to start. Now, this gets the basic idea down. Later on, when we test this out, we might find, oh, well, this path feels a little too narrow, feels a little too wide, the ups are a little too steep, the declines, you might find there are things you don't like. If you're not already using a pre-generated height map that you've decided on using some other package, and there are other packages to do this kind of thing, then I recommend you kind of work a little more fluidly when you first get started out. Get your basic idea down, test it, which is something we'll take a look at here in just a few moments, and then make changes accordingly. For now, though, I think this gets the general idea down. We have our 3 primary areas, we've got our basic shape in place, and we've carried on long enough. So, Lee, unless there's anything you want to add.
Well, you did bring up a good point with playtesting at this point in time. Mm-hmm. This is where you want to start doing it before you start getting into the texturing.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you decide to texture stuff too soon in the process and then you decide to actually go and change the terrain, you can find yourself having to retexture everything again.
Exactly. And your texturing when it comes to landforms should really be dependent on the shape of the landforms. Mm-hmm. So get your shape ironed out first. And then once you're happy with the overall look, with where you can and can't go, with how it feels as you travel across it, then and only then worry about what it looks like and where the textures are and how trees get placed and all that sort of thing. So we're getting that first critical process ironed out now. But that is going to wrap everything up for this video. Thanks a lot.